I met this guy online, seemed charming and sweet. We talked for weeks, really hit it off. He had all the right things to say, made me feel special. But then, things started feeling off. Small inconsistencies in his stories, photos that didn't quite match up. I brushed it off, thinking maybe it was just me overthinking. But then I stumbled upon something weird. His name, it didn't match the one he told me. I confronted him, and he got defensive, said it was a mistake, that he'd explain everything. He convinced me to meet in person, said he wanted to come clean, clear the air. I agreed, thinking it might just be a misunderstanding. When I met him, he seemed different, not like the guy I talked to online. It was unsettling, but I pushed that feeling aside. He took me to this secluded spot, said he wanted to talk. But as we sat there, he started acting strange, asking personal questions that made me uncomfortable. I wanted to leave, but something stopped me, this feeling of danger creeping in. Then he dropped the bomb, his real intentions. He wasn't who he claimed to be. He had been using someone else's identity, luring people in, and he had sinister plans for me. My heart raced, panic setting in. I tried to leave, but he blocked my path, this dark look in his eyes. I managed to break away, ran as fast as I could, heart pounding in my chest. He chased after me, calling out threats. I didn't stop until I reached a public place, people around. I called the cops, told them everything, shaking with fear. They investigated, found out the truth. He had a history, had done this before. It was like a nightmare, realizing I was inches away from something unimaginable. That charming guy was a predator, someone with twisted intentions. It was terrifying, the realization that I almost fell victim to someone's deceit and malice. I've never felt that kind of fear before, the fear of being manipulated and tricked by someone who seemed so convincing. Met this person online, seemed great. Chatted for a while, made plans to meet. They looked normal, nice smile, friendly vibes. We went to a cozy place, had dinner, talked about life. Everything seemed fine, just a regular date. But then, small things felt off. Inconsistent stories, vague answers. I brushed it off, thinking maybe I was overthinking. They were charming, engaging, but something didn't click. After dinner, they suggested going for a drive. I agreed, thinking it'd be nice. But as we drove, they took a different route, away from the city lights. I asked where we were going, but they just smiled, said it was a surprise. We ended up in this secluded spot, no one around. They stopped the car, and that's when things got weird. They started asking personal questions, too personal. I felt uncomfortable, trapped in this isolated place. Then they dropped it, they weren't who they claimed to be. Living a double life, hiding something dark. I froze, heart racing, feeling this dread sinking in. They had this strange look in their eyes, like they were a different person. I tried to leave, but they blocked the way, their tone changing, becoming aggressive. Panic surged through me. I pleaded, begged to go home, but they wouldn't listen. Fear twisted my stomach into knots. I knew I had to get out of there. I pretended to play along, calming them down. As soon as they were distracted, I bolted, ran blindly into the darkness. I could hear them shouting, footsteps chasing after me. I didn't stop until I reached a busy street, gasping for air, heart pounding. I called a friend, didn't stop shaking until they came to pick me up. I told them everything, feeling this overwhelming fear and confusion. Turns out, that person had a history, had done this before. It was like a horror movie. That seemingly normal date turned into a nightmare. The realization that I was inches away from something dangerous, it still terrifies me. The deceit, the fear, it's something I can't forget. The feeling that someone I trusted turned out to be someone else entirely, someone capable of such darkness. I had broken up with my ex around 2 years ago when this happened. My best mate kept telling me to download some dating apps and get myself out there. I had put it off for ages, but I felt like it was the right time to try and find someone. I had a bad experience with my ex. He cheated on me, not once, but several times. So, I downloaded the apps and matched up with a guy. He seemed really nice and I had a good feeling. We met twice in the same week. Things were looking good. On the second date, I even went back to his and So I was serious about making a go of things with him and life seemed more positive. But things started to feel off when he'd show up unexpectedly at places I mentioned casually. He'd call incessantly, text non-stop. It was flattering at first, but then it started getting too much. I tried to create some distance, but he wouldn't back off. I decided to end things politely. That's when his behavior turned weird. He didn't take it well, started pleading, saying he couldn't live without me. I felt this growing unease, this fear of what might happen next. He'd leave gifts at my doorstep, letters confessing his love. It felt suffocating, this obsession he had with me. When I made it clear I wanted space, he'd get angry, aggressive. He'd accuse me of leading him on, of playing with his feelings. He'd show up unannounced, way outside my workplace. I felt this constant fear, this sense of being watched, followed. I blocked him, changed my number. But he found ways to reach me, through mutual friends, by creating new accounts. It was like I couldn't escape him. He'd send threatening messages, saying he'd hurt himself if I didn't talk to him. I felt this overwhelming sense of guilt, this fear of being responsible for something terrible. I reported it, but without solid evidence, they couldn't do much. I felt this terror, this fear of what he might do next. I tried to live my life, but the fear of his obsession, his escalating behavior, it's something that still terrifies me. He'd leave notes, voicemails, saying he'd never let me go. I felt this constant paranoia, this fear of being trapped, of his obsession consuming me. I changed my routines, avoided going out alone. But the fear of encountering him, of what he might do, it's a nightmare that still haunts me. I lived in constant fear, always watching over my shoulder. The thought of being at someone's mercy, of their obsession turning into something dangerous. I installed this new dating app and matched with this guy, young, fit, seemed perfect. We agreed to have dinner at his place, but when I got there, something felt off. The guy in the photos wasn't the same guy who opened the door. I presumed it was his dad, much older. I was puzzled, confused as he hugged me and kissed me on the cheek and said I was going to have a great night. I walked in and he seated me, then went to finish cooking. I presumed he was cooking for me and his son. Then I had doubts that he had a son or that this was genuine. Then, I saw pictures of him and his son, the guy from the photos, on the fireplace. So I felt a bit better. I asked when he would be coming down and he said his son was at work all night. Oh my God, the penny dropped. It was like he was using his son's pictures for the app. I felt this shiver run down my spine. I confronted him, asked about the pictures. But he denied it, said I must have made a mistake, that we should just continue our date. I felt this creeping unease, this fear of what was really going on. I wanted to leave, but he was insistent. He seemed nice, normal, but this whole thing, it felt wrong, like I was being deceived. I tried to make sense of it, but he kept brushing it off, acting like everything was fine. I felt this rising fear, this sense of being trapped in a weird situation. I looked around, saw more photos of his son around the house. It felt like he was hiding something, this bizarre deception that I couldn't comprehend. He insisted we eat dinner, but I couldn't shake off this feeling of dread. I felt this overwhelming fear, this sense of being in a stranger's house, someone who wasn't who they claimed to be. I wanted to leave, to run, but he kept trying to make conversation, asking personal questions. I felt this knot in my stomach, this fear of what he might do if I insisted on leaving. I tried to subtly get out of there, but he was persistent, saying he had more things planned for the evening. I felt this growing terror, this sense of urgency to escape. I tried to find an excuse, anything to leave. But he was manipulative, making me doubt myself. I felt this mounting fear, this sense of being in a dangerous situation. I managed to make an excuse and left. I didn't look back, just rushed to my car, feeling this terror, this fear of what might have happened if I stayed. I reported it to the app, but without any solid evidence, they couldn't do much. I felt this overwhelming fear, this sense of having narrowly escaped something sinister. I changed my locks, my routine, tried to forget about the whole thing. But the fear of being deceived, of being in a stranger's house, it's a nightmare that still makes me shiver. The thought of someone using someone else's identity, of being trapped in their home, it's a fear that sends chills down my spine. The feeling of being in a deceptive situation, of narrowly escaping, it's a terror I wish I could forget. I met this person on Tinder and we decided to go for a coffee. They were nice, easy to talk to, nothing weird. I felt comfortable. But then, things started getting strange. Small comments, little things that made me doubt myself. They'd say something, then deny it, making me question my memory. I thought maybe it was a misunderstanding, maybe I misheard. We went for a walk, and they'd point out things that weren't there, saying I was imagining stuff. It made me feel uneasy, like my mind was playing tricks on me. I tried to ignore it, brush it off as my imagination. Then they'd bring up stuff from my past, details I never shared. It felt invasive, like they knew everything about me. I tried to ask how they knew, but they'd laugh it off, say I must have told them and forgotten. We went to this secluded spot they suggested, and that's when things got weird. They'd say things and then act like they never said them. It was like they were toying with my mind, making me doubt my own thoughts. I tried to leave, said I didn't feel comfortable, but they convinced me that it was all in my head, that I was overreacting. I started questioning myself, wondering if maybe I was being too sensitive. They'd manipulate situations, making it seem like I was overreacting or imagining things. It felt like I was going crazy. I started second-guessing myself, my perceptions. I felt this constant unease, this cloud of doubt hanging over me. I tried to talk to friends about it, but they said it was all in my head. I felt so isolated, like nobody believed me. I questioned my sanity, my own thoughts, wondering if maybe I was making a big deal out of nothing. Every time I tried to confront them, they'd twist things around, make it seem like I was the one causing problems. I felt trapped, like I couldn't trust my own judgment anymore. They'd say things that contradicted what they said before, making me feel confused and uncertain. I couldn't tell what was real anymore. It was like they were playing mind games, manipulating me. I started avoiding them, trying to distance myself. But they'd show up unexpectedly, making me feel like I was losing control over my own life. I felt this constant fear, this creeping dread of what they might do next. I couldn't sleep, always on edge, wondering if they were watching me, following me. I felt this deep sense of paranoia, like I was being watched all the time. I tried to cut ties completely, block them from everything. But the fear lingered, the feeling of being manipulated, gaslight. The thought that someone could mess with my mind, make me doubt my own reality, it's a nightmare I can't shake off. I felt so vulnerable, so scared. It was like they had this power over me, this ability to make me doubt everything. I've never felt that kind of fear before, the fear of someone playing games with my mind, making me question my own safety. It's a nightmare I wish I never had to live through. I matched with this person on a dating app. Seemed nice, normal, chatted for a while. We decided to meet up at a cafe. I got there early, waited, but they never showed up. Sent a message, no reply. I thought maybe the guy held up, so I went home. The next day, still no word from them. I checked the app, their profile was gone. It felt weird, like something wasn't right. I dug deeper, found out they weren't the only one who vanished after arranging a meeting through that app. Started asking around, heard stories, people going missing, last seen after setting up dates through that app. It sent shivers down my spine. I felt this chilling fear, realizing I might have stumbled onto something terrifying. I couldn't shake it off, that feeling of unease. I wanted to know more, to find out what happened to those people. I went through messages, trying to trace their steps, see if there were any clues. There was this one person who vanished after arranging a date at a park. I went there, looked around, trying to piece things together. It was eerie, that quiet park, the unsettling feeling of being watched. Then, as I was about to leave, I noticed something, a trail of torn fabric, like someone was dragged. My heart raced, fear gripping me. I followed it, feeling this overwhelming sense of dread. It led me deeper into the park, to this secluded spot. There was a phone lying there, cracked screen, abandoned. I picked it up, heart pounding. It was theirs, the person who vanished. Messages, calls, all unanswered. I called the cops, showed them what I found. They launched an investigation. I told them about the other disappearances linked to the app, hoping they'd find some answers. But as the days went by, nothing. No leads, no clues. It felt like hitting a dead end. The fear grew, the realization sinking in that there was something sinister going on. I couldn't shake off that sense of dread, like I was being watched, followed. Every noise made me jump, every shadow felt threatening. I kept looking over my shoulder, feeling this paranoia creeping in. I tried to go back to my routine, but the fear consumed me. I couldn't trust anyone, couldn't shake off the feeling that something terrible was lurking around the corner. I deleted the app, stayed away from dating sites, but the fear lingered. I was afraid to go out, to meet anyone. The thought that someone could just vanish, like they never existed, it's a nightmare I couldn't escape. I still wonder what happened to those people, the ones who vanished. It's like a chilling mystery, an unsolved puzzle. The fear of the unknown, of the possibility that I might never find out the truth, it's a nightmare that still keeps me up at night. I matched up with a really good-looking man on a dating app. We got chatting and he had all the vibes. But things took a turn. They knew things about me I never told them, stuff only close friends would know. It was unsettling, like they had access to my life. They'd bring up specific details, like they were reading my mind. It was impossible, but they knew too much. I felt this creeping fear, this invasion of my privacy. Then, they suggested meeting up at this remote place, a cabin in the woods. I was hesitant, but they insisted, saying it'd be private and cozy. When I arrived, the cabin looked nice, but something felt off. As soon as I stepped in, they knew things about the cabin, details they shouldn't know. It sent shivers down my spine. We talked, but it was weird. They brought up things from my past, my childhood, details that were too personal. I felt this fear creeping in, like they were reading my thoughts. I excused myself to the bathroom, but there was this strange device in there, like a hidden camera or something. Panic surged through me, heart racing. I confronted them, but they denied it, said I was paranoid. I wanted to leave, but they blocked the door, becoming aggressive. I felt trapped, this violation of my space and privacy. They started mentioning things from my private messages, my personal photos, stuff they shouldn't have access to. It was terrifying, this feeling of being watched, of having someone invade my personal life. I managed to escape when they got distracted, ran into the woods, not looking back. I could hear them shouting after me, chasing. I didn't stop running until I reached a main road, gasping for air, feeling this overwhelming fear and vulnerability. I reported it to the authorities, told them everything. But when they checked the cabin, there was nothing. No cameras, no signs of anyone. It was like I was in a nightmare, alone in this terrifying experience. I felt this constant fear, this paranoia that someone might still be watching me. I changed my passwords, my routines, avoided being alone. The thought of someone having access to my private life, it's something that still terrifies me. I've never felt that kind of fear before, the fear of someone using sophisticated technology to invade my privacy, to have access to my personal space. It's a nightmare I can't erase, a fear that still lingers in the back of my mind. I matched with this person on Tinder. Seemed charming, good looking. We clicked, had great conversations. Decided to meet up for a coffee. They were sweet, made me laugh, seemed genuinely interested. I felt comfortable. We started hanging out more often. It was nice, at first. But then, things started shifting. They'd make little comments, subtly criticizing my friends, saying they didn't understand me like they did. I brushed it off, thought maybe they were just protective. They'd suggest plans, but when I wanted to do something with my friends, they'd guilt-trip me, saying they wanted to spend time alone with me. It felt odd, but I didn't want to upset them. Gradually, they'd make remarks about my friends, my hobbies, saying they weren't good for me. They'd twist things, make me doubt the people I trusted. It made me feel torn, caught between them and my friends. They started getting possessive, always wanting to know where I was, who I was with. They'd check my phone, my messages, saying they were just curious. I felt this growing discomfort, this invasion of my privacy. Whenever I tried to talk about it, they'd turn it around, saying I was overreacting, being too sensitive. They'd manipulate situations, making it seem like I was the one causing problems. I started questioning myself, my thoughts. They'd make me feel guilty for spending time with anyone other than them. It felt suffocating, this slow isolation from my support system. I started distancing myself from my friends, canceling plans, making excuses. I didn't want to upset them, didn't want to argue. It felt easier to comply. They'd say things that contradicted what they said before, making me feel confused and uncertain. I couldn't tell what was real anymore. It was like I was losing touch with reality. They'd criticize me, my choices, my appearance. I felt this constant pressure to please them, to avoid conflict. I started feeling this overwhelming fear of losing them, of being alone. Whenever I tried to talk to friends about it, they dismissed my concerns, saying I was just overthinking. I felt so alone, like nobody understood what I was going through. They'd manipulate situations, making it seem like I was the one at fault. I felt this constant guilt, this never-ending cycle of trying to please them. I tried to end things, but they'd plead, apologize, promise to change. I'd give in, hoping things would get better, but they never did. They'd use my vulnerabilities against me, say things that hurt, that made me doubt myself. I felt trapped, this feeling of being powerless. I realized I was slowly losing myself, my confidence, my independence. It was like I was living in this nightmare, this cycle of manipulation and control. I finally gathered the courage to leave. It wasn't easy, but I knew I had to break free from that toxic relationship. It was like waking up from a bad dream, but the fear and trauma lingered. I sought help, talked to a therapist, but the scars of that manipulation, that isolation, they're still there. It's like a nightmare I can't fully escape, the fear of being manipulated and controlled by someone I trusted. I met this guy on a dating app. Seemed nice, easy to talk to. We hit it off, decided to meet. He suggested going to his place, said it'd be chill. When we got there, everything seemed fine. He introduced me to his roommate, a bit odd, but okay. We chatted, laughed, had a good time. But his roommate gave me this weird vibe, this intense stare that made me uneasy. As the night went on, his roommate's behavior got weirder. He'd interrupt us, saying odd things, making these intense eye contacts that made me uncomfortable. It was like he was trying to intimidate me. When my date went to the bathroom, his roommate cornered me, asking personal questions, invading my space. I tried to laugh it off, but he wouldn't stop. It felt wrong, but I didn't want to make a scene. As the evening progressed, his roommate's behavior got more aggressive. He'd stand too close, say inappropriate things, making me feel trapped and scared. I wanted to leave, but I was afraid of his reaction. When I tried to leave, his roommate blocked the door, saying I couldn't go until my date came back. Panic started rising in me, heart racing. I felt this suffocating fear, this sense of being trapped. I managed to sneak out when his roommate got distracted, ran out into the street, heart pounding. I called a friend, feeling this overwhelming fear and vulnerability. I tried to forget about it, but the fear lingered. I felt this constant paranoia, this feeling that I was being watched, followed. I couldn't shake off the thought of what might have happened if I didn't leave. I avoided going out alone, changed my routine. But the fear of running into him or his roommate, it's something that still terrifies me. I reported it to the authorities, but without solid evidence, there wasn't much they could do. It was like I was alone in this nightmare. The thought of someone being possessive, unhinged, and aggressive, it's a fear I can't shake off. The realization that I was inches away from a dangerous situation, it's something that still haunts me. The fear of being in someone's control, trapped in a situation beyond my control, it's a nightmare I wish I never had to experience. Our dates were fun, but things started getting weird. He'd get mysterious calls, always glancing around nervously. It was odd, but I didn't want to pry. One night, he asked me to hang out at his place. I agreed, thinking it'd be chill. But when I got there, something felt off. He seemed tense, on edge. I tried to ignore it, but the atmosphere was heavy. Suddenly, a group of people showed up at his place. They looked shady, rough around the edges. My date introduced them as friends, but their vibe was intense. I felt out of place, like I didn't belong there. They started talking in hushed tones, discussing something serious. I tried to leave, but my date stopped me, saying they were just catching up. I felt this knot of fear growing in my stomach. They started bringing out packages, exchanging stuff. It felt illegal, like I stumbled upon something I shouldn't have. I wanted to leave, but I was scared of their reaction. Suddenly, there was a commotion outside. I heard shouting, then loud bangs. My date's friends looked alarmed, grabbed their stuff and dashed out. My date told me to stay put, saying it was nothing. But then, the door burst open and armed men stormed in. They were yelling, searching the place. I was frozen, petrified, not understanding what was happening. They found something, a bag or something, and my date panicked. He grabbed me, said we had to leave. I was shaking, heart racing, as we ran out. We hid in a car, and my date was on the phone, talking frantically. I felt this terror consuming me, like I was in the middle of something dangerous. He told me to keep quiet, not to attract attention. I was trembling, barely able to breathe, as we drove through back alleys, trying to avoid being seen. He dropped me off at a random spot, said it was safer. I felt this overwhelming fear, this sense of being in the middle of something terrifying and dangerous. I called the authorities, told them everything, but I was too scared to give details. I felt like I was in over my head, caught up in something beyond my control. I didn't sleep that night, felt this constant fear of being found, of being involved in something dangerous. The thought that I was inches away from a syndicate operation, it's a nightmare I can't shake off. I changed my routines, avoided going out alone. The fear of being targeted, of being pulled back into that dangerous situation, it's something that still terrifies me. I tried to distance myself from my date, blocked him, deleted everything. I matched with this person on a dating app. They seemed nice, had a good conversation, so we decided to meet. They suggested a secluded cabin, said it'd be romantic. I agreed, thinking it could be fun. We drove for hours, deep into the woods. It was getting darker, more isolated. I started feeling uneasy, but I didn't want to ruin the night. When we arrived, the cabin looked old, eerie. There was this unsettling silence around, no other houses nearby. I brushed it off, thinking maybe it was just my nerves acting up. As soon as we got in, they acted strange. Kept checking the windows, doors, like they were paranoid. I asked if everything was okay, but they just brushed it off, said they were tired. They suggested a walk outside, under the stars. It sounded nice, but as we walked, I felt this creeping fear, like we were being watched. The woods were silent, too silent. They started saying weird things, making unsettling comments. I tried to laugh it off, but it felt off, like they were trying to scare me. When we got back, they kept insisting I stay the night. I hesitated, but they were so insistent. I started feeling this growing dread, this urge to get out of there. Suddenly, they flipped, their tone changing, becoming aggressive. They blocked the door, wouldn't let me leave. Panic surged through me, heart racing. I tried to reason, tried to get them to calm down, but they wouldn't listen. I felt trapped, this sense of impending danger choking me. I pretended to agree, to calm them down, waiting for a chance. When they were distracted, I bolted, ran into the woods, not looking back. I could hear them shouting, chasing after me. I didn't stop running until I reached a main road, gasping for air, heart pounding. I called a friend, feeling this overwhelming fear and vulnerability. I reported it to the authorities, told them everything. They searched the area, but found nothing. They said there was no evidence of anyone being there. It was like I was alone in this nightmare. I couldn't shake off that feeling of terror, the memory of being trapped, chased. It was like I narrowly escaped something terrible. The thought of what might have happened if I didn't run, it's a nightmare I can't forget. I felt this constant fear, this paranoia that someone might come after me. I changed my routine, avoided going out alone. The fear of running into them again, of being in danger, it's something that still terrifies me. I met this person on a dating app. Seemed nice, normal. We chatted, decided to meet up for a casual hangout. It was all going well, easy conversations, until he suggested playing a game. He said it was a fun game they used to play with friends. Sounded innocent, so I agreed. He blindfolded me, saying it was part of the game. I felt a bit hesitant, but I trusted them. As soon as I was blindfolded, things changed. The atmosphere shifted. I heard whispers, faint noises that made me uneasy. I tried to brush it off, thinking it was just my imagination playing tricks. The game started, and they guided me around, leading me into different rooms of their place. But something felt off, like they were leading me in circles. I started feeling disoriented, this growing sense of unease. The whispers grew louder, more sinister. I asked to stop, but they insisted it was part of the game, that I needed to keep going. I felt this knot of fear in my stomach, but I didn't want to seem scared. As the game progressed, I felt someone or something brushing past me. I panicked, trying to remove the blindfold, but they stopped me, saying I'd ruined the game. I could sense multiple people around, their movements too close for comfort. I started feeling trapped, this overwhelming sense of being in a situation beyond my control. The atmosphere turned chilling, the air heavy with tension. I wanted to leave, but they wouldn't let me. It was like they were enjoying my fear, my vulnerability. The game felt never-ending, this nightmarish cycle of darkness and unknown figures lurking around. I felt this terror engulfing me, unable to tell what was real and what wasn't. I tried to reason with them, to stop the game, but they ignored me, their laughter echoing around me. It felt like a nightmare, the fear of the unknown, the feeling of being at someone's mercy. Eventually, they removed the blindfold, but things didn't stop. The atmosphere was suffocating, like I was still blindfolded, surrounded by this sinister presence. I managed to leave, heart pounding, feeling this overwhelming relief. I didn't understand what had happened, what kind of game that was. It was like I was caught in a nightmare, a game that turned into a chilling scenario. I met this guy from a dating app. Seemed nice, decent. We agreed to meet at the park. It was going fine, casual conversations until he suddenly got serious. Out of nowhere, he confessed that he conducts psychological experiments on his dates. It was bizarre, sent chills down my spine. I thought it was a joke, but his expression was dead serious. He started talking about manipulating behaviors, studying reactions. I felt this creeping fear, this unsettling feeling of being a part of something I didn't sign up for. He said he was interested in my reactions, my emotions. It felt invasive, like I was a lab rat under observation. I tried to laugh it off, but he was dead serious. I felt this overwhelming urge to leave, this fear of being in the presence of someone so calculating, so manipulative. But I didn't want to upset him, didn't want to be a part of his experiment. He kept talking about his methods, his theories. It was like he was analyzing me, trying to provoke a reaction. I felt trapped, this growing sense of alarm and fear. He talked about pushing boundaries, testing limits. I felt this suffocating fear, this feeling of being trapped in a situation beyond my control. I tried to change the subject, but he kept circling back to his experiments, his theories about human behavior. It felt wrong, this invasion of my privacy, my emotions. I made an excuse, said I needed to leave. I felt this urge to run, to get away from someone so unsettling. But he seemed unfazed, almost pleased with my reaction. I left the park, heart racing, feeling this overwhelming sense of fear and vulnerability. It was like I stumbled into something terrifying, a situation that made my skin crawl. I felt this constant paranoia, this fear of being studied, manipulated. I couldn't shake off the feeling of being a subject in someone's twisted experiment. I blocked him, deleted everything, but the fear of being part of someone's psychological experiments. I met this guy on a dating app. Seemed nice and he was very charming. We went on a date, had a good time. Went for some food and then some drinks at a bar. He invited me back to his place, said it'd be fun to hang out more. We got to his place, and everything seemed normal. We talked, laughed, and had a few more drinks. It was a good time. We ended up in his bed, and I can assume you know the rest. But then things took a dark turn. Suddenly, he said he needed to take a call and left the room. I thought nothing of it until I noticed a weird blinking light. It was a hidden camera, recording us. My heart sank. I felt this overwhelming sense of violation, this creeping fear. I wanted to leave, but then he came back, acting all casual like nothing happened. I tried to act normal, but I was on edge, this terror consuming me. I wanted to confront him, but I was scared of his reaction. After I left, he started sending me messages, saying he recorded our time together. He threatened to release it unless I paid him a hefty amount of money. I felt this panic setting in, this fear of being exposed, of my privacy being violated. I didn't know what to do, who to turn to. He kept pressuring me, threatening to ruin my life. I felt trapped, this sense of dread gnawing at me. I tried to reason with him, to beg him to stop. But he was relentless, using that recording as a weapon against me. I was scared, paranoid, always watching over my shoulder. The fear of that video being released, it's a terror that consumed me. I tried to gather the money, but it was never enough for him. He kept demanding more, using that recording to control me. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus. The fear of being exposed, blackmailed, it's a nightmare I couldn't escape. I reported it to the police, but without solid evidence, they couldn't do much. They searched his place but found nothing. I felt helpless, alone in this terrifying situation. I changed my number, blocked him from every platform. But the fear of that video resurfacing, it's something that still terrifies me. I met this guy on a new dating app I downloaded. He seemed really nice. I would say he was a strong 9 out of 10. We hit it off, had some good dates. But things took a turn when he started mentioning his ex, saying she didn't handle the breakup well. One night, we were out for dinner, and suddenly, I spotted someone watching us. It was his ex, glaring at me. I felt this chill run down my spine, this sense of being watched. He noticed her too, got tense. He said she was just being jealous, but something about her stare felt more than that. It felt threatening. After that night, I started noticing her around more often, lurking, following us. It was creepy, unsettling. I didn't understand why she was fixated on me. He downplayed it, said she was just trying to cause trouble. But her presence made me uncomfortable, on edge. One day, I received messages from an unknown number, threatening messages. It was her, saying I should stay away from him, that I was interfering. I felt this surge of fear, this sense of danger. I confronted him, but he said she was just trying to scare me off. But it felt more than just a scare tactic. Things escalated when she started showing up at my workplace, leaving disturbing notes. I reported it, but without solid evidence, there wasn't much they could do. I tried to distance myself, block her, avoid places she might be. But she was relentless, always finding a way to reach me. One night, I heard noises outside my place, footsteps. I looked out, and there she was, staring right at me. I felt this overwhelming fear, this realization that she was escalating. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, she was gone. I felt this constant fear, this terror of what she might do next. I changed my routine, stayed with friends, avoided being alone. But the fear of her presence, of her threats, it's something that still terrifies me. One day, I came home to find my door unlocked. I felt this panic, this sense of intrusion. She'd been in my place, left notes, photos, threatening messages everywhere. I reported it, but she vanished. It was like she knew how to torment me, to make me feel scared and powerless. I felt this constant paranoia, this fear of being targeted by someone so possessive and threatening. I couldn't sleep, always watching over my shoulder. I met this guy on a dating app my sister made me download. He seemed okay, just a regular guy really. We decided to meet for dinner. He was friendly and I felt a spark, but something felt off. His smile seemed forced, his eyes had this distant look. So this had me double thinking the spark. During dinner, he'd pause randomly, like he was lost in thought, then snap back without explanation. It was weird, but I didn't want to pry. He kept checking his phone every few minutes. It was like he was waiting for something, someone. I felt this growing unease, this sense that something wasn't right. He'd occasionally mutter to himself, words I couldn't catch. It made me uncomfortable, this feeling of being around someone unpredictable. When I tried to steer the conversation away from small talk, he diverted, changing the subject abruptly. I felt this wall between us, this sense that he was hiding something. At one point, he excused himself to the restroom and took way too long. When he returned, his demeanor had changed. He seemed agitated, restless. He glanced around nervously, like he was being watched. I felt this creeping fear, this sense of danger that I couldn't place. As the evening went on, his behavior became more erratic. He'd fidget, mumble to himself, glance over his shoulder. It was like he was a different person, someone I didn't know. I wanted to leave, but I was scared of how he'd react. He seemed on edge, this potential for something to snap. When we parted ways, he said something cryptic about not knowing what the future holds. It sent shivers down my spine, this ominous feeling. I tried to shake off the unease, but I couldn't ignore the nagging fear that something wasn't right about him. That night, I received a text from an unknown number. It was him, saying things that made no sense, almost threatening. It felt like a warning, but of what? I didn't know. I blocked him, deleted everything, but the fear lingered. His strange behavior, those cryptic words, it was like a puzzle I couldn't solve. I couldn't sleep, this constant worry that I missed something, that I was in danger. I felt this overwhelming sense of dread, this fear of the unknown. I tried to carry on with my routine, but the thought of him, his unsettling behavior, it's something that still terrifies me. I reported it to the authorities, but without solid evidence, they couldn't do much. It was like I was alone in this terrifying situation. I felt this constant paranoia, this fear that he might show up, that his cryptic messages meant something sinister. I changed my routines, avoided places I frequented. But the fear of encountering him, of what he might be hiding. Met a guy on Tinder one night. We got chatting over the next week or so. Everything was fine until he started mentioning details about my life that I hadn't shared with him. He knew where I lived, my favorite spots, even my daily routine. It felt invasive, unsettling. I hadn't mentioned any of these things to him. I thought maybe he found my socials or something or knew someone I knew. I decided to give it a go and we met for a date. During dinner, he'd casually bring up places I'd been, things I'd done. It was eerie, this feeling of being under a microscope. He'd comment on my friends, places I hung out. I felt this creeping fear, this sense of being watched, of someone knowing everything about me. When I confronted him, he brushed it off, saying he remembered our conversations. But his accuracy was unnerving, too precise to be a coincidence. He'd randomly show up at places I mentioned casually in conversations. I felt this growing sense of fear, this feeling of being hunted. I tried to distance myself, but he'd always find a way to show up, to bring up details about my life that he shouldn't have known. One day, I found out he'd been going through my social media, liking old posts, commenting on personal photos. It felt like an intrusion, this violation of my privacy. He started sending messages, saying things that felt possessive, controlling. It was like he was keeping tabs on my every move. I felt this constant paranoia, this fear of being watched, followed. I couldn't escape this feeling of being stalked. He'd call at odd hours, leave voicemails. It felt like I was being monitored, this looming presence that I couldn't shake off. I tried to cut off contact, block him from every platform. But he'd create new accounts, find ways to reach me. I reported it to the authorities, but without concrete evidence, they couldn't do much. It was like I was trapped in this nightmare with no way out. I changed my routines, avoided going out alone. But the fear of his obsession, his invasive tracking, it's something that still terrifies me. I felt this suffocating fear, this constant dread of being watched, of someone knowing every detail of my life. I'd catch glimpses of him in public, this feeling of being hunted, followed. It was like I couldn't escape, like he was always one step ahead of me. I moved away, changed my number, but the fear of his stalking gives me the serious creeps. I matched with this guy on a dating app. Seemed cool, really cute. We agreed to meet up for a coffee. It was going fine until he started hinting about this party happening later that night. He said it'd be a blast, fun crowd, great music. I hesitated, but he convinced me, said it'd be a great way to get to know each other. We arrived at this secluded spot. It was dark, isolated. I started feeling uneasy, like something wasn't right. But he reassured me, said it was just down the road. As we walked, I noticed a group of people waiting. They seemed off, this eerie vibe. I wanted to leave, but he said it'd be rude not to stay. The party felt wrong, the atmosphere tense. People were staring, whispering. I felt this knot of fear in my stomach, this sense of being in the wrong place. I tried to make small talk, but they weren't interested. They seemed preoccupied, like they were waiting for something. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted. They surrounded us, blocking any chance of leaving. I felt this surge of panic, this realization that something was terribly wrong. They started talking about things I didn't understand, about some kind of gathering. I felt this overwhelming fear, this sense of being in danger. I tried to leave, but they wouldn't let me. It was like I was trapped, this impending sense of doom. They kept pressuring, saying I should join them, that it'd be an unforgettable experience. But something felt sinister, this feeling of being lured into something dark. I tried to reason with them, to explain I wasn't interested. but they seemed fixated, almost desperate for me to stay. The situation turned chilling. They started talking about a ritual, something about an initiation. I felt this terror engulfing me, this realization that I was in serious danger. I tried to run, to escape, but they grabbed me, held me back. I felt this wave of fear crashing over me, this sense of helplessness. They kept insisting, saying it was for my own good, that I needed to be part of it. But it felt wrong, this gut feeling that I was being lured into a trap. I managed to break free and ran as fast as I could. I didn't look back, just ran until I found someone, somewhere safe. I reported it, but without concrete evidence, they couldn't do much. I felt this constant paranoia, this fear of being followed, hunted. I changed my routine, my habits. But the fear of that night, of being lured into a trap, it's a nightmare that still terrifies me. The thought of being part of something malevolent, of being trapped by a group with dark intentions, it's a fear that never leaves you. Even to this day. I matched with this person on a dating app. We hit it off, decided to meet for dinner. They seemed nice. After the meal, he suggested meeting his family. I figured meeting his family would be cool too. We drove to their place, a remote house in the woods. Their family seemed off, distant. They gave me these weird looks, whispered among themselves. I felt like I didn't belong there. Their house was old, creaky, with family photos on the walls, but something about them felt eerie. During dinner, they talked about their family history. It was like they were hiding something, avoiding certain topics. They'd glance at each other nervously, like they were all keeping a secret. After dinner, they insisted on showing me around the house. It was dimly lit, giving off this unsettling vibe. They took me to the basement, said it was just an old storage area. But then, I saw it, a locked door. I asked about it, and their expressions changed, like I touched a nerve. They brushed it off, said it was nothing, but I couldn't shake off this feeling that something wasn't right. Later that night, I heard strange noises coming from that locked room. Muffled cries, scraping sounds. I tried to ignore it, but it felt like something terrible was happening behind that door. I couldn't sleep, haunted by those sounds. I got up, tried to investigate, but the door was locked tight. I felt this overwhelming dread, this gut feeling that I shouldn't be there. The next morning, I noticed bloodstains near the door, fresh ones. My heart raced, fear consuming me. I confronted them, but they dismissed it, said it was an old accident, nothing to worry about. But I knew something was terribly wrong. I wanted to leave, but they insisted on one last thing, an old family ritual. It felt bizarre, ominous. They chanted in a language I didn't understand, their faces twisted in an unsettling manner. It sent shivers down my spine. As night fell, I heard those noises again, louder this time. I couldn't take it anymore. I tried to leave, but they blocked my way, their faces contorted, eyes wild. I managed to escape, ran through the woods, heart pounding, terrified. I called the cops, told them about the sounds, the bloodstains, everything. But when they arrived, the house was deserted, no sign of anyone. The cops searched, but found nothing. They said there was no evidence of any wrongdoing. It felt like a nightmare, the fear of what might have been happening behind that door, the chilling realization that I was in the midst of something horrifying. I couldn't shake off that feeling of dread, the memory of those sounds, the bloodstains. It was like I stumbled onto something beyond my worst nightmares. The thought that I was inches away from something unspeakable, it still haunts me. The fear of not knowing what was really happening, of being trapped in a situation beyond my control, it's a nightmare that I can't erase. I met this guy through a dating app. He seemed cool, fun. We'd been chatting for a while, and things were going well. He invited me to his place for a casual hangout. When I got there, he seemed pretty laid back, easygoing. We were chatting, having a good time when he mentioned this ritual he and his friends did for fun. It sounded harmless, just a quirky thing they did. He said it was a tradition among their group, nothing serious, just for laughs. I didn't think much of it, just thought it might be a fun, quirky thing to experience. We gathered in a room, candles lit, dim lighting. They seemed serious about it, which surprised me. I felt a bit uncomfortable but didn't want to seem uncool, so I went along. They started chanting, this eerie, rhythmic repetition of words. It felt odd, unsettling. I didn't understand what was happening, but I played along, trying to keep cool. As they continued, the atmosphere shifted. There was this heaviness, this feeling of something sinister lurking. I felt this knot in my stomach, this unease growing stronger. They began doing these gestures, hand movements, almost like a dance. It was strange, this sense of being part of something I didn't understand. I tried to back out, saying I wasn't feeling it, but they insisted I stay. Their chants grew louder, more intense. It felt like I was stuck in this weird ritual that was spiraling out of control. Then, they brought out this old-looking book, started reading from it. It felt like the air around us changed, this eerie silence enveloped the room. I felt this wave of fear wash over me. As they read, their expressions turned serious, almost grim. I couldn't make out the words, but it felt dark, ominous. Suddenly, things took a chilling turn. They asked me to join in, to recite some lines from the book. I froze, this terror gripping me. I wanted to leave, to run, but it was like I was paralyzed. They were insistent, almost forceful. It felt like I was in a nightmare, this feeling of being trapped in something I couldn't understand. I managed to break free and ran out of there. I didn't look back, just ran until I found a safe place. I reported it to the authorities, but without concrete evidence, they couldn't do much. I felt this constant fear, this sense of being tangled in something dark and inexplicable. I changed my routine, avoided being alone. But the fear of that ritual, of what it might have meant, it's a nightmare that still haunts me. The thought of being part of something chilling, something I couldn't comprehend, it's a fear that sends shivers down my spine. The feeling of being pulled into a ritual with chilling undertones, it's a terror I wish I could forget. I met this person through a dating app. Seemed nice. We had a good connection, and things were going smoothly. But then, during a casual conversation, they dropped a bombshell. They confessed this dark secret, something they were involved in. It sent chills down my spine. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It felt like I was pulled into something beyond my control. They said it wasn't a big deal, but it was huge, something dangerous. I felt this overwhelming fear, this sense of being implicated in something I had no part in. I wanted to leave, to distance myself, but they made it seem like I had to keep their secret. It felt like a weight on my shoulders, this terrifying situation I was suddenly a part of. They said I couldn't tell anyone, that it was a matter of life and death. I felt trapped, this fear of what might happen if I spoke up. I tried to rationalize, to find a way out, but I felt this constant fear, this looming sense of danger. They'd call, text, reminding me to keep quiet. I felt this suffocating fear, this sense of being watched, monitored. I tried to cut ties, to block them, but they'd find a way to reach out. It felt like I was stuck in this nightmare, this situation spiraling out of control. I felt this constant paranoia, this fear of what might happen if their secret got out. I tried to live my life, but the thought of being implicated, it's a terror that still haunts me. I reported it, but without concrete evidence, there wasn't much they could do. I felt this overwhelming fear, this sense of being at someone's mercy. I changed my routine, avoided being alone. But the fear of their secret, of being dragged into something beyond my control, it's a nightmare that still keeps me up at night. The thought of being involved in something dangerous, something I never signed up for, it's a fear that grips me, a nightmare I wish I could escape. The feeling of being implicated in a situation beyond my control, it's a terror that lingers, a fear I wish I never had to face. I met this guy named Gavin on a dating app. Seemed like a regular guy, hardworking, down to earth. We hit it off and decided to meet up for dinner at a local place. Things were going okay, casual conversation, until Gavin dropped this bombshell. He leaned in, whispered, said he was on the run from the police for a crime he didn't commit. I felt this chill crawl down my spine. He looked terrified, pleading for my help. He said he needed someone trustworthy, that he saw something in me that made him believe I could help him. I didn't know what to do. It felt like I was in a movie. I wanted to leave, to distance myself, but he begged me, said he was innocent, that he just needed a safe place to stay for a while. I felt this overwhelming fear, this feeling of being caught in something beyond my control. He said he had evidence that could clear his name, but he needed time. He swore he was innocent, that he'd explain everything later. It felt surreal, like I was being dragged into a nightmare. I wanted to believe him, but the fear of being involved in something dangerous, it was terrifying. He kept asking for my help, saying he had no one else to turn to. I felt this immense pressure, this sense of being manipulated. I tried to reason, to make sense of it all, but the fear of what might happen if I refused, it was paralyzing. I felt this suffocating sense of dread, this feeling of being at the mercy of someone else's circumstances. He pleaded, said he trusted me, that he needed a place to lay low. I felt this overwhelming fear, this sense of danger closing in. I tried to cut ties, to distance myself. But he'd show up unexpectedly, saying he needed to talk, that he was counting on me. I felt this constant fear, this dread of what might happen next. I tried to report it, but without proof, there wasn't much the authorities could do. I felt this terror, this sense of being entangled in something beyond my control. I changed my routine, avoided being alone. But the fear of being implicated, of getting involved in something dangerous, it's a nightmare that still keeps me up at night. The thought of being dragged into someone else's troubles, of being manipulated, it's a fear that lingers, a nightmare I wish I never had to face. I met this guy through a dating app. Seemed charming, genuine. We hit it off, started dating. But then things got weird. He started talking about this shared past we supposedly had. Memories, places, events that I couldn't remember. It felt strange, like I was in a parallel universe. He was insistent, said we had these amazing experiences together. But I couldn't recall any of it. It was like he was making up this whole history between us. I confronted him, said I didn't remember any of what he was talking about. He got defensive, angry. He accused me of lying, of pretending not to remember. He'd bring up these specific details, moments we supposedly shared. But it felt like a fabrication, this weird sense of being trapped in someone else's narrative. I started feeling this fear, this sense of being manipulated. He'd get angry if I questioned our supposed shared past. It felt like he was trapping me in this web of lies. I tried to distance myself, to break things off. But he wouldn't let it go. He'd call, text, showing up uninvited, saying we had to work things out. He'd say things that made my skin crawl, things only someone close would know. But it didn't match with my memories. I felt this overwhelming fear, this sense of being gaslit. I tried to get help, to talk to friends, but he'd intercepted, saying they were in on the whole thing, that they were covering for us. It felt like I was losing my mind. I tried to piece things together, but the fear of what he might do next, it was paralyzing. It felt like I was trapped in this twisted game, unable to escape. He'd tell me I was forgetful, that something must be wrong with me. But it felt like he was gaslighting me, trying to distort reality. I tried to report it, but without concrete evidence, they couldn't do much. I felt this constant fear, this sense of being ensnared in his lies. I changed my routine, avoided going out alone. But the fear of his fabricated history, of being trapped in his web of lies, it's a nightmare that still haunts me. The thought of someone constructing a false reality, of being trapped in their twisted narrative, it's a fear that chills me to the bone. The feeling of being manipulated, of being made to doubt my own memories. Met this person on a new dating app. He was charming, made me feel comfortable. We decided to meet, go for dinner. They knew so much about me from our chats, it felt like we were old friends. It was nice, easy conversation, nothing odd. But then, they started bringing up things I never told them. Personal things, stuff I only mentioned to close friends. I felt this chill creeping in, this unease. How did they know all this? I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe I forgot I mentioned those things. After dinner, they suggested going for a walk. I agreed, thinking it'd be nice. But as we walked, they started mentioning details about my family, my home, my routine. It felt invasive, like they were digging into my life. I tried to change the subject, but they kept steering it back, dropping more personal information. It felt like they were using what they knew to control the conversation. Then, they started making subtle threats, hinting at things they shouldn't know, using my personal info as leverage. I felt trapped, this growing fear knotting in my stomach. They suggested going to a more secluded spot. Alarm bells went off in my head, but I didn't want to escalate things. I tried to reason, tried to get out of it, but they wouldn't listen. They had this menacing look, this dark glint in their eyes. I felt this fear gripping me, like I was on the edge of something dangerous. I pretended to go along, trying not to show my panic. As soon as I saw a chance, I bolted, ran as fast as I could, heart pounding, lungs burning. I didn't stop until I found a crowded street, surrounded by people. I called a friend, my voice trembling. Told them everything, feeling this overwhelming fear and vulnerability. I cut off all contact, blocked them, deleted everything. But the fear lingered, the feeling of being manipulated, violated. The thought that someone used my personal information against me, to control and coerce, it's a nightmare I can't shake off. I felt this constant paranoia, like someone was watching me, following me. Every shadow felt threatening, every noise made me jump. I kept looking over my shoulder, afraid they might come after me. I changed my routine, avoided going out alone. The fear of running into them, of them knowing more about me than I wanted them to, it's something that still terrifies me. I reported it to the authorities, but without solid evidence, there wasn't much they could do. It's like living with this fear, this constant dread of someone having access to my life, my personal information, using it against me. I've never felt that kind of fear before, the fear of being manipulated and coerced, of someone having power over me through personal information. It's a nightmare I wish I never had to live through, a fear that still lingers in the back of my mind. I met this person through a dating app. Seemed nice, charming. We had a good connection, and they asked me out for dinner. It was all fine until things took a bizarre turn. During dinner, they started talking about something odd, something about a secret project they were involved in. It felt weird, out of the blue. They kept saying I'd understand once I knew more. They insisted on taking a drive after dinner. I didn't want to seem rude, so I agreed. But during the drive, they took a detour, going off the main roads into some secluded area. They started talking about this project again, but it was cryptic, like they were being watched. I felt this creeping unease, this sense of being dragged into something dangerous. Suddenly, we were being followed, this car tailing us. It felt like a scene out of a thriller. They panicked, saying we needed to lose them. It was surreal, this fear gripping me. We took these back roads, trying to shake off the car behind us. I felt this fear, this knot in my stomach, this sense of being caught in something I had no part in. They said we had to hide, so we stopped at this deserted spot, turned off the lights. I felt this suffocating fear, this sense of imminent danger. We waited in silence, trying to make sense of what was happening. But it felt like we were sitting ducks, waiting for something unknown. They were tense, on edge. They whispered about being involved in something bigger, something dangerous. I felt this overwhelming fear, this sense of being pulled into a conspiracy. I tried to reason with them, to make them see how dangerous it was. But they were adamant, saying we had to lay low until things cooled down. I felt this terror, this feeling of being in the middle of something deadly. I wanted to leave, to run, but they insisted we stick together, saying it was safer. I felt this fear, this sense of being trapped in a stranger's car, in the middle of nowhere. I thought about calling for help, but they warned against it, saying it would make things worse. I felt this helplessness, this fear of what might happen next. We stayed hidden for what felt like hours. I was terrified, not knowing what was happening, not understanding the danger we were in. Finally, the other car seemed to leave. They said it was safe to go now. But I felt this lingering fear, this sense of being involved in something I didn't understand. They dropped me off, said they'd explain later. But I felt this terror, this fear of what I might have gotten myself into. I reported it to the authorities, but without solid evidence, they couldn't do much. I felt this constant fear, this sense of being entangled in a dangerous conspiracy. I changed my routine, kept looking over my shoulder. But the fear of being implicated, of being involved in something deadly, it's a nightmare that still keeps me up at night. The thought of being unwittingly involved in a conspiracy, of being dragged into danger, it's a fear that grips me, a terror I wish I could forget. The feeling of being in a situation with potentially deadly consequences, it's a nightmare I can't shake off. We agreed to meet at this old, abandoned mansion. It was weird, but I thought maybe they were into spooky stuff, you know? I got there, and the place was eerie, like something out of a horror movie. The date was late, and the whole atmosphere just felt wrong. When they arrived, they acted as if everything was normal, but I could sense this unease in the air. They suggested exploring the mansion. I didn't want to seem scared, so I agreed, but I felt this creeping sense of dread. As we walked through the creaky halls, strange things started happening. Sounds from empty rooms, footsteps where no one was. I tried to brush it off, but it was unnerving. Then, the temperature dropped suddenly, and I swear I felt someone breathe on my neck. But when I turned, there was no one there. It sent shivers down my spine. My date seemed unfazed, but I was terrified. I suggested leaving, but they insisted on staying, saying it was all part of the thrill. I felt this overwhelming fear, this sense of being in a place I shouldn't be. We heard voices, whispers echoing through the corridors. I wanted to run, but my date just laughed it off. I felt this gut-wrenching fear, this sense of impending danger. Lights flickered, shadows moved on their own. I felt this panic, this fear of something I couldn't explain. It was like the mansion had a life of its own. I suggested leaving again, but my date brushed it off, saying it was all in my head. I felt this suffocating fear, this sense of being trapped in a nightmare. Then, doors slammed shut, trapping us in one of the rooms. My date tried to open them, but they wouldn't budge. I felt this overwhelming terror, this sense of being helpless. I tried to call for help, but there was no signal. It felt like the mansion was playing tricks on us, like we were at its mercy. I felt this desperate fear, this sense of being in danger. Suddenly, the air grew heavy, this presence that felt malevolent. I felt this sheer terror, this sense of something sinister lurking. We heard footsteps, but no one was there. I felt this paralyzing fear, this sense of being watched. It was like the mansion was alive, and it wanted us out. I tried to break a window to escape, but it wouldn't budge. I felt this overwhelming panic, this sense of being trapped in a place that defied logic. Finally, the doors creaked open. We ran out, didn't look back. I felt this terror, this fear of what might have happened if we stayed. I reported it later, but they said the mansion was abandoned. No one was supposed to be there. I felt this chilling fear, this sense of having encountered something beyond explanation. I couldn't sleep for days, the fear of that night lingering. The thought of inexplicable occurrences, of being in a place that defied reality, it's a nightmare that still haunts me. I met this person from a dating app. We decided to meet at this quaint little cafe. They seemed nice, charming even. But then, things got weird. We were having a conversation, just getting to know each other, when suddenly, they stopped talking. I thought they were just pausing or something, but they didn't move. They were just frozen, staring blankly. I tried to get their attention, but it was like they were in a trance or something. I felt this unease creeping in, this fear that something wasn't right. I looked around, and everyone in the cafe was frozen too, like time had stopped, except for me. I felt this growing panic, this fear of being alone in a place that suddenly felt eerie. I tried to shake them, to make them snap out of it, but nothing worked. I felt this overwhelming fear, this sense of being in the middle of something inexplicable. I rushed outside, hoping to find help, but the streets were empty. It was like the whole world had frozen, except for me. I felt this chilling fear, this sense of being completely alone. I looked back at the cafe, but it was different. It was dilapidated, abandoned. It didn't make sense. I felt this terror, this fear of something I couldn't comprehend. I tried to call someone, anyone, but my phone wasn't working. I felt this rising panic, this sense of being trapped in a nightmare. I decided to go back inside, to see if I could figure out what was happening. But the cafe was gone, replaced by this desolate landscape. I felt this overwhelming fear, this sense of being lost in a place that defied reality. I tried to find clues, something that could explain what was happening. I found a photo, a newspaper article about a missing person. It was my date. I felt this chilling fear, this sense of being involved in something sinister. I searched for more clues, anything that could help me understand. I found a diary, detailing experiences that mirrored what I was going through. I felt this growing terror, this sense of being part of a nightmare. Then, I saw my own reflection in a broken mirror. But it wasn't me. It was someone else, someone familiar. I felt this terror, this fear of what I might discover about my own identity. I tried to leave, to escape this place, but it was like I was trapped in a loop. I felt this overwhelming fear, this sense of being caught in a maze with no way out. I found a door, a way out, or so I thought. But it led me back to the cafe. I felt this terror, this fear of being stuck in a place that twisted reality. I tried to piece together what was happening, but it was like trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. I felt this haunting fear, this sense of being in a situation that defied logic. I stumbled upon an old book, pages filled with stories that mirrored what I was going through. I felt this chilling fear, this sense of being part of something beyond my understanding. I heard whispers, voices from nowhere. I felt this creeping fear, this sense of being watched by something unseen. I found a way out, a portal or something. But it led me to another version of the same place. I felt this overwhelming terror, this fear of being stuck in a never-ending loop. I tried to find an escape, to break free from this nightmare. But every attempt led me back to the same place. I felt this despair, this fear of being trapped in a reality that twisted and turned. I woke up, gasping for air. It was all a dream, a nightmare that felt too real. But the fear lingered, this haunting feeling that it wasn't just a dream. I met this person on a dating app. Seemed nice, charming. We went on a few dates, everything felt normal. But then, things got strange. They started texting me constantly, bombarding me with messages. I felt this unease, this sense of being suffocated by their attention. They showed up unexpectedly at places I mentioned in passing. It felt invasive, this feeling of being watched all the time. They started calling me repeatedly, wanting to know where I was and who I was with. I felt this creeping fear, this sense of being stalked. I tried to distance myself, but they didn't take the hint. They'd show up at my workplace, my home, everywhere. I felt this rising panic, this fear of being constantly under their radar. They sent me gifts, flowers, things I never asked for. It felt like an invasion of my privacy, this feeling of being manipulated. I tried to confront them, tell them it was too much, but they brushed it off, saying it was just them being caring. I felt this growing fear, this sense of being unable to escape. They started talking about our future together, planning things without my consent. I felt this suffocating fear, this sense of being trapped in their fantasy. I blocked their number, but they found ways to reach out through different accounts. I felt this overwhelming terror, this sense of being pursued relentlessly. They showed up at my door, uninvited, demanding answers. I felt this chilling fear, this sense of being unsafe in my own space. I told friends and family, but they said I was overreacting, that it was just someone interested. I felt this despair, this fear of not being taken seriously. I changed my routine, my routes, but they always seemed to find me. I felt this constant fear, this sense of being hunted. I noticed them following me, lurking in the shadows. I felt this panic, this fear of being in danger. I tried to report it, but without evidence of direct threats, nothing could be done. I felt this helplessness, this fear of not being protected. They started leaving notes, messages that became more aggressive. I felt this terror, this sense of being in imminent danger. I stayed up at night, fearing what might happen next. I felt this haunting fear, this sense of being in a nightmare with no end. I saw them waiting outside my window. I felt this paralyzing fear, this sense of being watched in my own home. I called the police, but they said they couldn't do much without concrete proof. I felt this overwhelming terror, this fear of not being safe anywhere. They started leaving threatening messages, saying they couldn't live without me. I felt this dread, this fear of what they might do. I tried to escape, to go somewhere they wouldn't find me. But they always knew where I was. I felt this despair, this fear of being relentlessly pursued. I noticed them breaking into my home, leaving traces of their presence. I felt this chilling fear, this sense of being violated. I sought help, but the authorities said they needed evidence of immediate danger. I felt this desperation, this fear of being on my own. I feared for my life, every moment filled with terror. I felt this constant fear, this sense of being on the edge of something deadly. I didn't know what to do, where to turn. I felt this overwhelming terror, this fear of not being able to escape. And then one day, they vanished. No more calls, no more messages, nothing. I felt this eerie fear, this sense of being in the eye of the storm. But the fear lingered, this constant terror of them resurfacing. I felt this haunting fear, this sense of never being truly safe again. I met this guy on a dating app, thought he was cool. We went on a few dates, everything was chill, but then, he drops this bomb on me. He starts talking about this arrangement. At first, it's like a casual conversation, but then it gets serious. Like, he wants us to live together, sharing everything, every decision. It feels suffocating, this pressure to commit to something huge. I'm not down for it, so I say no. But he keeps pushing, saying how it'll be perfect, how our lives will be better. It feels controlling, this insistence on something I'm not comfortable with. I try to explain, tell him it's moving too fast, but he doesn't listen. He keeps saying how great it'll be. It feels like he's not hearing me, this disregard for what I want. He starts showing up uninvited at my place, bringing stuff like we're already living together. It feels invasive, this intrusion into my space. He talks about our future like it's already set, like I have no say. It feels manipulative, this attempt to control my life. I try to distance myself, but he's persistent. He keeps texting, calling, wanting to discuss the arrangement. It feels suffocating, this constant pressure to agree. He starts acting possessive, asking about my whereabouts, wanting to know who I'm with. It feels invasive, this invasion of my privacy. I try to break it off, but he gets angry, saying I'm making a mistake. It feels threatening, this sudden change in his behavior. He starts mentioning things he shouldn't know, details of my life that I never shared. It feels creepy, this invasion of my privacy. He talks about how much he knows about me, about my routine, my friends. It feels chilling, this realization that he's been watching me. I confront him, demand to know how he knows all this stuff. But he avoids the question, says it's not important. It feels unnerving, this refusal to explain. I feel this fear growing inside me, this sense of being trapped in something dangerous. I try to cut ties, block him, but he finds ways to reach out. It feels like I can't escape, this constant pursuit. He starts saying things that make me question my own safety. It feels like a threat, this fear of what he might do. I try to seek help, tell my friends, but they don't take it seriously. They say I'm overreacting, that he's just interested. It feels frustrating, this lack of support. He starts leaving gifts, notes, things I never asked for. It feels like an intrusion, this violation of my boundaries. I try to change my routine, be more cautious, but he seems to know my every move. It feels like I'm being watched, this constant paranoia. He starts showing up wherever I go, like he's always one step ahead. It feels like I'm being followed, this sense of being stalked. I try to report it, but without direct threats, nothing can be done. It feels like I'm on my own, this sense of helplessness. He starts leaving messages that make it clear he won't give up. It feels like a nightmare, this sense of being trapped in a dangerous game. I fear for my safety, for my life. It feels like there's no escape, this constant dread. I try to lay low, disappear for a while, but he always finds me. It feels like there's no hiding, this constant chase. And then one day, he vanished. No more calls, no more messages, nothing. It feels eerie, this sudden silence. But the fear lingers, this constant dread that he might come back. It feels haunting, this sense of never truly being safe again. I met this person online, seemed nice, good looking. We hit it off, went on a few dates, but then things got weird. They never talked much about their past, always dodged questions. It felt off, this sense of them hiding something. I noticed inconsistencies in their stories, things that didn't quite add up. It felt suspicious, this feeling of being lied to. I tried to ask about their family, friends, but they changed the subject. It felt like they were avoiding something, this reluctance to share. I brushed it off, thought maybe they were just private. But then, I stumbled upon something strange. I found a document, an ID card, hidden in their place. It didn't have their name on it. It felt eerie, this discovery of a hidden identity. I confronted them, demanded an explanation. But they got defensive, said it was a mistake. It felt like they were hiding the truth, this refusal to come clean. I tried to leave, but they blocked the door, saying there was more to the story. It felt menacing, this sense of being trapped. They confessed, said they were on the run, using a false identity. It felt terrifying, this realization that I was with someone hiding from the law. They begged me not to call the cops, said they'd explain everything. It felt like I was in over my head, this fear of being involved in something illegal. I wanted out, to distance myself, but they kept insisting on explaining. It felt like I had no choice, this pressure to stay. They revealed a criminal past, serious stuff, things I couldn't believe. It felt surreal, this discovery of their dark history. They pleaded for my help, saying they'd change, that they needed me. It felt like a trap, this manipulation to get me involved. I tried to leave again, but they blocked my way, saying they couldn't let me go. It felt like a nightmare, this realization that I was in danger. They started making threats, saying they'd hurt me if I called the police. It felt like a horror movie, this fear of what they might do. I tried to reason with them, to calm the situation, but they wouldn't listen. It felt like I was in a dangerous game, this fear of my safety. I managed to escape when they weren't looking, ran out, called the police. It felt like a relief, this chance to get away. But they were gone by the time the cops arrived, vanished into thin air. It felt like a horror show, this fear of them resurfacing. The police investigated, found evidence of their criminal history. It felt like a close call, this realization of how dangerous it had been. They never caught them, said they were probably long gone. It felt like a never-ending nightmare, this fear of them returning. I changed my locks, moved to a new place, tried to start fresh. It felt like a fresh start, this hope for safety. But the fear lingered, this constant dread of them finding me again. It felt like I was always looking over my shoulder, this fear that they might come back.